Okay guys, in this video we're going to talk about the togaviruses, but we're only going to talk about the togaviruses that affect the CNS because like all of the other videos, I'm doing this as part of our CNS block at my institution. So that's why we're talking about a specific group of them. There are other togaviruses that we'll talk about at other points, but for now we're actually going to focus on a specific group of the togaviruses, which are known as the alpha viruses. All of these are enveloped viruses. I like to remember this by thinking that the viruses are wearing a toga, which is their envelope. I know, bad microbiology joke. There's three viruses in particular we're going to talk about, and these are the equine encephalitis viruses. So the equine encephalitis viruses tells you two things. One, horses get them. Two, they cause encephalitis. So really, really helpful. And they continue their trend of being helpful in their naming. I know, a shocker for microbiology, in that their names actually also tell you their largely geographic distribution. So you've got the Venezuelan equine encephalitis virus. Guess what? That happens near Venezuela. Eastern equine encephalitis virus, not quite as helpful, but still something, and Western equine encephalitis virus. So let's talk about kind of their structure and how they work. Okay, so just a side note, this isn't the first time we've talked about the togaviruses or even the alpha viruses. We talked about chikungunya, and I have a video on my YouTube page for chikungunya. Love to say that one, chikungunya. Anyway, wouldn't want to experience it. So we learned about that one in the Walter Peters case in host defense, host response. But these viruses have a lot in common with chikungunya. First off, they all have a mosquito vector. And Venezuelan and Eastern can use the Aedes mosquito as well as the Culex for Venezuelan and Culiceta for Eastern. Western kind of splits the difference. It takes the Culex from the Venezuelan and the Culiceta from Eastern. Chikungunya actually just prefers Aedes aegypti. These are viruses, again, that as we see those mosquitoes come north, we might expect to see in the United States. The hosts, for the most part, rodents, but sometimes horses. And then also there's birds for Eastern equine and Western equine. So remember, these hosts are kind of where they hang out. They're not necessarily pathogenic to them. In the case of Venezuelan, actually, it is pathogenic to horses. Chikungunya obviously has a different host source. It's humans and monkeys, and that also affects its distribution. So like I said before, Venezuela, we're largely talking about South and Central America. There are a couple cases in Texas, potentially, but that's about as far north as it's currently going. Eastern equine encephalitis, this one is more in North and Central America with a few in South. And then Western equi, again, we're talking about North and Central with a little bit of South America. And you can see that each of these can cause encephalitis. Chikungunya tends to be more of like a fever and arthralgia, arthritis. So that's kind of a difference in what we see in the alpha viruses. So we're going to focus on the equine encephalitis viruses here. Okay, so I said it before, even though it's not on this slide, but I'll write it out. These are enveloped viruses. They are icosahedral in their capsid shape, and they have a positive sense single-stranded RNA genome. They enter cells using receptor-mediated endocytosis, like a lot of enveloped viruses. The Western equine encephalitis virus is actually a little interesting. It's actually a combination. It's like the brainchild of two other alpha viruses. The first one being actually Eastern equine encephalitis virus, and the second one being Bis virus, which I don't currently teach, but that's another alpha virus in the Togaviridae family. So the genome to WEEV is almost identical to EEEV. And like the flaviviruses, these viruses might have antibody-mediated enhancement of infectivity, partially because their genomes are so similar. You're going to diagnose these by RT-PCR for viral mRNA in the blood and other tissues. So certainly you could look in the CSF. But you do get significant viremia. Culex mosquitoes are the main reservoir, but don't forget there are some that use Aedes and some that use Culiceta. So you've got a couple options there, but Culex is kind of your main one. I already talked about kind of the distribution. So let's talk about the disease. We don't see a ton of this. Approximately 15 cases are reported a year. The Venezuelan equine encephalitis virus is, like I said, kind of the one that we might see in the US. It's sometimes seen in Texas, but the majority of these are going to occur outside the US. The disease occurs in about 25% of infected children, but only in about 1 in 50 adults. The encephalitic phase of this disease, though, is often fatal. It actually has kind of a higher mortality rate. The initial presenting systemic phase is actually characterized typically by like fever and chills and aches and pains that we associate with some of these. And that normally lasts for 1 to 2 days. If it moves into the encephalitic phase, you're going to see drowsiness, tremor, and seizures. EEEV is actually particularly severe in children, where there's actually a 70% fatality rate. So it's real bad news for children to contract that one. WEE is less severe, and the fatality rates tend to be a little bit lower, more like 10%. Unfortunately, currently there is no vaccine and no supportive treatment for any of these viruses.